The next step.
That's a matter of looking at the documentation to show what was actually done.
And suppose the allegation is not based on the documentation, but on an oral misrepresentation.
It could be the interviewing of other students to see if this is something that they have experienced, looking at practices of the school, talking to others, just doing a comparison.
So it doesn't end at that point if it's an
No.
oral
If it's-
misrepresentation claimed.
Right, because we'd have to be
Right.
able to prove to see if this has happened to other students.
Okay, great. And then, if we could just have some samples of, and again, I know you can't provide actual complaints to us, but summaries in the next report, that would be very helpful.
And actually, I did put together a summary of the complaints that we closed for the month of January of this year, and I can provide those to you.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate you both.
Anybody else have any questions for our compliance or enforcement team? Public comment now or wait until the...
I just want to say great job, Yvette. I know recruiting quality talent right now has been taking a lot of your time, and so let's keep up the good work.
Oh, I'm sorry. One other thing. I think I've asked this before, too. One of the things that makes complaints look as if they've been sitting around for a long time is that they're still open when they have been referred for enforcement to another agency. And I had asked whether it was possible to have a separate category of ones that were referred out, and I don't know whether that's been considered or not. But again, I would ask that that be looked into, and if it can't be done, just let us know it can't be done, and if it can be done, then include that in the next report.
Thank you very much, ladies. Okay. Before we go on to the next part of the Bureau team, does anyone have public comment on enforcement or compliance or enforcement? All right, great. So next up, looks like licensing and quality of education. Morning.
Good morning. I'm Marina O'Connor, the licensing chief.
I don't think you're on there. There you go.
Robert Bales, Education Administrator.
So I'm going to start by going over the statistics provided in your packet. You'll see the first chart is the one we typically provide at the committee meetings that show a snapshot of where our applications are at a point in time. So the one in your packet are licensing applications as of April 1st. Things are actually moving so quickly now in licensing that some of these numbers have already drastically changed. So I wanted to just provide more updated numbers for a couple of these, not all of them. But the ones that stick out the most as far as how much they've changed just since April. If you look at the first row, new full approvals, so those are our non-accredited applications, our approval to operate non-accredited. If you look in the column titled pending assignment queue, in your chart it shows 26. That's actually down to 17. And I'm happy to report that only 2 of those 17 are actually complete applications that we received in May, which means our backlog of new full approval applications pending review is gone. And that downward trend of that those pending applications started before I started with the Bureau, and is really a result of staff and management pushing really hard to stick to our internal processing timelines, really working with applicants to complete deficiencies and pushing the applications forward. So it's really to their credit. They've been, some of them coming in on weekends to get through that backlog. So just very happy to report that and proud of my team who's just worked very hard.
I don't think we were pushing that hard.
It was a light push. And the other number I wanted to update you on was in the same column, but the row titled renewal full, which is our renewal non-accredited applications. It shows 36 pending assignment in queue. That's now down to 16 just since April. So you can see how quickly these are moving forward. 14 of those applications are complete, which means they're waiting review, and 2 are incomplete. So, you know, those are the ones we're really focusing a lot on now to get that backlog cleared. So I'm just very excited to be able to report that the progress we've made just in such a short amount of time. A couple other dates I wanted to point out that have changed since this you received this packet. At the very bottom, the bottom chart that says as of April 30th, 2018. The oldest renewal full apps under review, it says January 31st, 2013. That's now October 15th, 2014. So we're really closing out a lot of these older apps. And the very bottom row, median date of renewal full apps in queue, that's now February 15th, 2018. So a little bump there. But looking at all those dates in that box, so there are some old applications we're still working on, but I really want to point out the median dates. So the median date of full apps in queue, median date of renewal, that really gives you a better idea of where we are on processing those applications. And once all, you know, the old ones we've been working on close out, you know, that median date will get, you know, more recent. And a lot of those average days to approve those timelines, those, as long as we close out those apps, those will still be skewed a bit from those old apps. But once those apps are closed out and we're caught up, those average, I'd expect to see that processing time come down. Before I go on to the other charts, do you have any questions on the ones here on this page? Okay, so at the request of the committee, we put together a number of new charts and graphs to give a better idea of kind of the time trend on applications and our app workload. We focused primarily for this meeting on new non-accredited applications, so those are the new full applications as well as renewal non-accredited applications. And that first chart there is a nice comparison that shows over a 12-month period the number of apps received compared to the number of apps completed and the number of apps pending, where you can see very dramatically that downward trend in pending applications. And it's just, it's nice to be able to compare that to see, well, okay, how many apps were coming in, how many were closing out, and it's pretty obvious correlation between, you know, when there's a low number of apps received, we're able to push through a lot more applications quicker. So that definitely contributed to that downward trend. And there's a number of other charts behind that. I wasn't going to go through all of them individually because there's just so many, but it's basically a breakout over the last 12 months of apps received, apps completed, and apps pending, again, over a 12-month period. So if anyone has any questions on those charts or graphs. And because this is something new that the committee requested, if you have any feedback on, you know, any other data points you'd like us to present or in a different format, please, we're, you know, happy to, you know, work with you on that.
I do have one question, and I may just have missed it among these charts, but are you tracking registrations also?
As far as out-of-state registrations? Yes. We do, just not in the new charts that we provided. The new ones were mainly just the non-accredited applications we receive. But on the first page, that very first chart where we show the snapshot as of April 1st, you'll see at the very bottom row, the out-of-state registration applications as of April 1st are shown there. So that's the only place we show it to the committee right now. But if there's any other, you know, data you'd like us to show, we can.
And I appreciate you having on, I guess it's the second page here, or maybe page 40, and as it's listed, listing the number of locations. I think that's very helpful for us to understand.
Yes, I was going to point that out. That's also something new, is that very last chart, total number of schools by location type and approval type. So that's a nice also snapshot of our currently approved schools. So if anyone has any questions on that.
I don't have a question. I did want to congratulate you on completing the leadership development course, so congratulations.
Thank
for
you.
that.
A couple things, and I'm not sure, Maria, actually, you would be able to answer these, but maybe just for future discussion. One is the process, and I think at the last time I spoke to, I was probably Mina, about what is the status of a pathway for non-accredited out-of-state distance ed providers. So just, I know that there's internal discussion going on about that, but as it is continuing to come up for me with my clients who want to become registered in California but can't because they're not accredited, what is the sort of the pathway or plan for that? I had another question, but I lost my train of thought, so just that one for now.
No, I just think it's hugely important for the advisory committee to realize how much work that she and the team have been doing to clear some of that backlog. That is huge because that's been something that even in my short time at the Bureau, a lot of people have been asking about the backlog in the Bureau, and for her to come in and be here for relatively, I think, 4 months, and her team to really do the great work they're doing, I think it's big for the committee to really notice that. And obviously, I appreciate you giving kudos to Robert and the work that he was doing prior to your arrival, but I just want to give real kudos to our team because they have really been doing a great job.
Thank you for that. And I just remembered what my other question was. Is there an update, and maybe for you, maybe for you, Mike, about applications or questions that you're getting about ACICS and schools that were sort of in the path of becoming fully accredited now, maybe, or fully approved? Have you had a lot of conversations and things coming up with that?
In licensing, we have gotten inquiries, and I believe we have on our website a FAQ that addresses most of those questions. Anything that's not addressed outside of that would be case by case, of course, depending on the situation. But we have gotten some. At least in licensing, I wouldn't say it's a lot of inquiries, and perhaps that's because of the FAQ on our website that's answered a lot of those questions, but we do get them, yeah.
As soon as the news was announced, we rallied the team and we sat down and kind of tried to go all over different scenarios, and then we put that information on the website as well as sending out information to the institution so they would know what's going on. So we tried to be proactive as soon as we got that information.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Robert?
Morning.
Good morning.
So part of what the Quality of Education Unit does is the tracking of accredited institutions, or the tracking of accreditation plans for non-accredited institutions. And so what I provided here today is an update on the schools that we affectionately call the 1247 schools. We have two different buckets, but basically, if you recall, back in 2014, Senate Bill 1247 was passed, which required all degree-granting institutions in California to either be accredited or to be making progress toward accreditation. So again, I've separated them into two buckets. 94885.1 schools were schools that were approved to operate on or before January 1st of 2015. So those schools basically had until July 1st, 2017 to become pre-accredited, and they have until July 1st, 2020 to become fully accredited. So basically, when the Bureau reached out in 2014 to all of our schools that were non-accredited, I think we had 150 back then. So of the 150, we had some schools that closed, we had some schools that had their degree programs suspended, we had some schools that surrendered their degree programs. What was left as of July 1st, 2015 was 108 schools that were tracking since that date. So what I've provided is a snapshot in time of those 108 schools. As you could see, various categories in there. One thing I do want to point out, it says that 4 were granted extensions to meet candidacy status, and 5 received degree program suspension orders. That's current as of today. So we have 5 schools out there that have their degree programs suspended. But the Bureau actually issued 28 automatic suspension orders after July 1st, 2017 to those schools that did not achieve pre-accreditation. So of that 28, again, some of them are in these other categories as of today. So 49 schools right now have achieved accreditation candidacy, and they're on track to becoming accredited by 2020. Second group of institutions are our provisional approval schools. So any school that applied to be approved after January 1st of 2015 up until today and into the future, they're limited to 2 degree programs if they're non-accredited, and they have to submit a degree plan, accreditation plan that basically demonstrates that they'll be pre-accredited within 2 years and fully accredited 3 years after that. So it's the same timeline as the first group of schools, but the dates that they have to become pre-accredited and accredited are obviously based on their date of approval. So if a school was approved today, provisionally approved to operate 2 degree programs, they'd have 2 years to become pre-accredited and another 3 to become accredited. So right now we have 34 institutions that are provisionally approved to operate degree programs.
Robert, in that second category, the 0.5 category, does that include institutions that had to submit an accreditation plan because of ACICS?
No, it does not include ACICS schools.
Okay.
They're kind of in a separate category.
They're in their own category, okay.
One quick question. Thanks, Robert. Are there any trends in terms of accreditors that you've seen in the 49 folks in candidacy status? Are they all going to one place? Is there a majority that you can share with us?
It's funny, I was thinking about that question as I was sitting over there. Anecdotally, it's really scattered. Some schools have chosen ACCSC. There's a group of schools that want to go with ACCSC. We have a group of schools that have religious programs. They're going to TRACS, which is a religious accreditor, but really they're kind of across the board. If you like, I can provide that information next time.
Anybody else have questions for our licensing and education quality team? All right. Thank you both. Before we move on to the next presentation, is there any public comment on the 2 presentations? Going, Bueller, okay. On to OSAR.
Morning.
Morning.
Scott Valverde, Chief of the Office of Student Assistance and Relief. So this morning I wanted to give you an update on some general objectives and priorities and kind of where OSAR is at in sort of broader strokes, and then also give you an update on our responsiveness to each of the items that the advisory committee recommended to us directly in the last meeting. One of those recommendations was to share our outreach content that we're developing. And so we actually have developed an instructional video to help students walk through the process of filling out a STRIF application completely and accurately. And so at that point in my update, we will go ahead and show that in video. So hopefully technology will work, and I don't know about positioning in terms of seeing the screen when we get to that part, but I will give you a heads up when we get to that point. And then lastly, I'll just take any questions that you have on the 2 handouts you have in terms of where we're at with our stats. So in terms of just general update, the things that OSAR is working on are definitely increasing awareness. So in a variety of different venues and by different means in terms of media, press releases, and other media outlets, the use of social media, the development of our Facebook and Twitter accounts, and using that extensively, as well as posting information on our website. and then going out and doing presentations with our partners, all around that concept of increasing the awareness of what's still a fairly new program. We're also looking at expanding our outreach efforts beyond what the Bureau has done, student outreach efforts, beyond what the Bureau has done historically by partnering with our statutory partners, developing and building on those relationships, as well as cultivating new relationships with other partners as well that touch students and work directly in the area of student relief and outreach. So we're also really working on fine-tuning and instilling the principles that I talked last time about case management and individualized services and wraparound services when we're working with students. Things like assigning specific OSAR analysts to specific school closures, to specific claims, and working with those students individually all the way through whatever the resolution of their next step in their journey is. And we're doing that through training, ongoing training, and just continually looking in the mirror in terms of how we provide services, how we work with students, and the resources that we have available to us to help them in that next step, whatever it may be. And then we're working tirelessly on being as prepared as we possibly can for whatever the next school closure might be, and being as proactive as we possibly can, working with our enforcement units and our schools of concerns list and process to sort of be out in front of these situations before they happen, so that we can be as prepared as we possibly can in terms of deployment of resources and sort of understanding kind of what the options are based on the school that potentially may close, and then doing, again, a more proactive approach in general. So those are the things that we've been working on. At the last meeting, there were several recommendations that were made by the advisory committee, and I want to go through an update on each one of those. One of the recommendations was to include OSAR information with any outgoing responses to transcript requests. And so the Bureau has begun doing that by placing OSAR flyers and information in the responses to any transcript request that comes in from students. And the next step in that process are going to be to make some changes to the form itself and to our processes in terms of follow-up once we get those requests. Another recommendation was made last time that before we close out a STRIF claim as under the category unable to contact due to 3 unsuccessful attempts via all of our contact information that we have in-house, to go a step further and to use either the LexisNexis system or other online search services to do a deeper dive into where those students may be given the transient nature of our students. And so we have access to the LexisNexis account now at OSAR. Staff's begun to go through self-directed training, and then the next step is to do a more coordinated training as well, and then to update our process and procedures to incorporate the use of LexisNexis into our process. The next recommendation that was made at the last meeting was to expand the net breadth and width of our outreach efforts to new areas and new special populations, again, where perhaps the Bureau has not focused in the past. And so we are doing that. That was definitely a great recommendation, was already aligned with efforts that I had in place at that time, which are moving forward. We've doing quite a bit more with the K-12 area and high school students and their parents. We've participated in a series of events put on by the National Association of College Admissions and Counseling that was this spring. It's sort of a combination of a career college fair and then also breakout sessions with workshops on content that's very aligned with OSAR's mission. We had staff that and myself that attended all of those workshops up and down the state. And so that's one area, and we're looking to do more in that area as well. In fact, we're at the early stages of developing an OSAR-delivered workshop that we're going to be putting on, hopefully in the fall, that will be targeted towards that population as well. We participated in the Black College Expo events, ongoing events with exiting service members through our partnership with CalVet. And then also in the next steps to that recommendation, I met recently with the California Community College Chancellor's Office, and we're exploring some opportunities for shared outreach around transfer, and then also around special populations. And they'll be sharing some data with me, and we're going to be looking at some opportunities. I'm also trying to dig in with the workforce development community as well and get OSAR information embedded within the one-stop center model and retraining arenas, as well as those individuals are sort of walking through the decision tree of where private post-secondary may lie in their future as well. And we want OSAR to be involved. And I also have staff partnering with some local community-based organizations as well that do student-targeted outreach in local communities. And so I think I'll have more to report on that at the next meeting. The next recommendation is actually a series of recommendations at the last meeting about expanding the data elements to share with you above and beyond what's included in the two reports that are in front of you, the STRIF report that's historically been given to the committee, and also our statutorily required quarterly report, which is posted on our website quarterly. Specifically, you asked about things like average time to complete a STRIF claim, the amount that's actually paid out of claims versus the amount that the student requests, sort of accounting for those claims where there may be a loan discharge that's involved, or educational credit, or some other mitigating factor that would decrease what that real potential liability is in our reports. And also the percentage of claims that include loan discharges you asked about. So we're working on all of those. Our strategy was to develop those data elements. There's obviously a process that we would need to do to sort of capture that data and aggregate it. And our intent is to provide that to you moving forward in a year-end report, starting January 1. That's really when we'd be more a good line in the sand in terms of where we were close to being fully staffed. And so we are collecting that data, and at the next meeting we can share with you that first preliminary report. But it was all helpful to us for internal planning as well, and internal improvements. Okay, and then the last thing that you asked was to share our outreach material. So are we good, Paul? So we have shared with you our flyer. Our PowerPoint that when we go out and do presentations is very, very dynamic and fluid depending on who the audience is. So I can share those, but mainly those initial talking points and some of the things I've been talking about are what we cover, and then depending on who the audience is, we customize it. But the next sort of tangible thing that we've developed is this video. And again, the intent of this is to help students when we can't be there with them one-on-one. Obviously, our number one priority is to meet with the student either in person or over the phone virtually and walk them through the application, walk them through all their potential eligibility and the documents they need, sort of handhold them, for lack of a better word, but we're not always able to do that. And so this is not intended to replace that sort of dynamic, but to augment it and to help when we can't be there. So it's about 5 minutes just to prepare you, and it's animated. It's intended to sort of connect with our student population. And without further ado, if you guys.
Is it possible to get that on this TV too, so we can see it? Okay. Everybody up.
Sorry about that.
The Office of Student Assistance and Relief, OSAR, is here to help you after a private post-secondary school closes. We may be able to help you recover tuition costs, and we can help you research other schools to transfer to so you can ask the right questions and explore all your options. We can also work with other state and federal agencies on your behalf. We are here to help if you have questions on filling out your application for the Student Tuition Recovery Fund, STRIF. This fund is available for California students registered in a school approved by the California Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education. Please don't disqualify yourself before contacting us. Apply even if you think you are not eligible for STRIF or are missing requested documents. We can help you determine your eligibility. Now, let's look at the STRIF application. The application is available on our website. You can download the application to your computer and fill it out, then save it before printing and mailing it. Or you can print it out and fill it out by hand, then make a copy for your records. All applications must be mailed, not faxed or emailed. Be sure to fill in all information on the application or we won't be able to process it. In Section 1, under Student, don't forget to fill in your Social Security number or taxpayer identification number. In Section 2, you must provide documents to prove you attended the school. Those documents may include, but are not limited to, your enrollment agreement, transcripts, and loan agreements. Section 3 asks questions about your attendance and California residency. Fill in Section 4 if you attended another institution after your school closed. Section 5 lists qualifying events, but don't disqualify yourself because of this information. Just get your application in and we can review it and decide. Section 6A asks for your out-of-pocket expenses for going to school. Did you make any payments by cash, check, credit card, debit card, money order, or cashier's checks? If you answer yes, then you must provide documents to support your expenses. Those documents may include, but are not limited to, receipts, an image or copy of cash checks, front and back, school statements, and bank statements. Section 6B asks if you use student loans to pay your tuition. Student loans include federal loans, private loans, and parent loans for undergraduate students. If you answer yes on 6B, then you must provide documents to support your expenses. Those documents may include, but are not limited to, loan statements, loan agreements, any documents showing you took out a loan, and proof of payments. Section 6C asks if you use grants or third-party payments for tuition. A third party is anyone other than you or your parents. This can include Cal Grants, Pell Grants, scholarships, veterans benefits, employer payments, and workers' compensation payments. If you answer yes to 6C, then you must provide documents to support your expenses. Those documents may include, but are not limited to, receipts, school ledger cards, and school account records. Section 6D asks if you had any non-tuition economic loss. Those losses include registration fees, expenses for required equipment, examination fees, and any other payments to the school not already listed on this form. To determine your total economic loss for this claim, add up the amounts from A, B, C, and D, then add any legal expenses you may have had, up to $500, for possible reimbursement of fees you've already paid. You must let us know if you received any refunds, reimbursements, or forgiveness for any part of your economic loss. If you can't provide the needed documents on this form, explain why at the end of Section 6D. We may be able to help you get those documents. In Section 7, don't forget to sign, date, and print your name. The final page is the Loan Negotiation, Certification, and Authorization form. You can skip this if you don't have any student loans. If you have student loans, you must fill this out because it allows us to contact your loan servicer on your behalf. One form is good for all of your loans. Now, double check your application. Did you include all requested documents that you have? Did you completely fill out your application? If you need help filling out your application, contact our staff at OSAR. Call us at 888-370-7589 or email questions to osar@dca.ca.gov.
Okay, so again, as you can tell, the intent of the of the video is instructional, and it's pretty narrow in focus in terms of, as it relates to OSAR, in terms of the completion of the STRIF application. But it is based, the storyboard and script was based on most commonly found errors and omissions in the STRIF application. So it was based on that to sort of address that need. Next step would be to develop, and we're in the queue to do this, more of a video giving a more broad overview of OSAR services and sort of introducing to the general public kind of what we do and how we do it. And we're working on that now, and that'll be shared in the future as well. Any questions on my updates to your recommendations from the last meeting before we go on to the reports?
So, first of all, great job, Scott, on that video. I have to tell you all, when I first saw that video, I couldn't stop laughing because we actually have 2 staff members that if you put them together, they look like the guy that was speaking. And that's Paul over there to the right and Eric in the back. And it's like a good blend. It was hilarious. And if you knew their personalities, you would understand where I'm coming from. But great job, guys, and great job to the team back in OSAR. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I have a few.
Sure.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing it in the video form. I think that's very helpful. A couple of questions. One of the things is I didn't see any reference there to OSAR being able to help students get the documents if they don't have them from the school.
Oh, it says that.
It does.
It
does
says
say
that a couple
that?
times.
It did say that.
I thought it just said help you with your application. Okay, sorry, missed it. And the other thing is when it's mentioning the kind of documents, one of the things that sometimes comes up is leave of absence documents, which it might be helpful to mention because that screws up the timing sometimes as to whether they were or weren't there.
Yeah.
The other question I have, and I don't know the answer, is loan documents covers everything, but if you have a student loan, do students understand it as a loan document or a promissory note? Do you know? I mean, I don't know, but I'm just wondering if that term is one
that
that is
resonates with them, you
easily
mean?
understood, or whether they say, well, all I have is a promissory note, I don't know. But might be something to look into for future things. And the other thing is, I'm just curious about the $500. If they're getting help from legal aid, I don't think legal aid charges them. So how are they supposed to present information about what they've paid for legal services? I may be wrong. I think, Megumi, you probably know more an answer to that. But
An economic loss if they haven't.
well, except the statute says that they're entitled to attorney's fees, which the whole point was so that people would be able to provide legal services. So, I don't think I don't know.
Good morning. My name is Christy Shield. I'm an attorney with the Department of Consumer Affairs Legal Office. I've been with the department for 18 years. Ms. Ryder and I are familiar with one another. I used to be the former Bureau for Private Postsecondary and Vocational Education Counsel for about 8 years. But I've been recently assigned to assist Mr. Valverde and OSAR and STRIP. My understanding is that, yes, legal fees you can claim them, but only if you paid them and it came out of your pocket. So that's the idea behind that, is that you suffered a loss as a result of the closure or other qualifying event. So that has not been my understanding of the claim process. So my understanding is legal services does provide those services free, but I don't know if there are costs associated, and Mr. Valverde could speak to this, with maybe going to their offices or something. Do they get expenses for that? I don't know.
Well, one of the questions from the last meeting was, have we had any claims that have been submitted where they've requested this or filled out that section of the claim since the statute was amended? And the answer to that is no. We did do a dive into that, so we haven't really crossed that bridge yet. But it's a good question about other costs outside of the direct fees.
That may be something we need to deal with legislatively, because I understood the intent was to encourage more legal service to be available for students. And of course, one of the primary ones, which is limited, is legal service because of all the other things they need to do. So it would be helpful if they had some reimbursement. But if that needs to be cleared up, that's an issue, I guess, beyond what we can do.
I have one question for you. Thank you for the thorough review of recommendations from the last meeting and the action taken since. That's
Appreciate that.
commendable. I'm curious, given the new nature of this department and your role there and the many demands, which are diverse,
Yeah.
what protections do you have in place to keep a clear view of the scope of work and the real fundamental mission of this new department?
What controls do we have? Is that what?
Yes, so for example, as you went through the
Yeah.
recommendations, you've diversified already in a lot of different
We have.
directions, for example, right?
Yeah.
Like, so outreach to high schools, for example. And that's just one example among probably 6 or 8 that you mentioned. So as a new organization and the broad variety of demands on your resources, I'm just curious, and maybe it's more of a recommendation than a question, but how do you keep your focus on the fundamental mission?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way I can answer that question in terms of efforts that we've done to date are really to work very, very transparently and on an ongoing basis with the bureau chief and with the bureau in general, and then also internally looking at our staff resources, our duty statements, and how they mesh with the intent of OSAR and the sort of statutory provisions and the mandates like the quarterly report, et cetera, and sort of putting that sort of in one bucket and then just knowing that we need to be as prepared as we possibly can for whatever the next big closure may be. And so that's something that I'm always sort of out, making effort to be out in front of actively through, meetings with enforcement, checking on the accreditation status of schools, the general sort of financial aid status of the schools with US DOE, and whatever indicators we may have, in terms of a school that may be a possible closure coming down the pike. And then as those red flags become a darker shade of red, I will always be in direct communication with my staff on an ongoing basis that we'll dedicate our resources to be prepared. The development of their duty statements there was a lot of thought put into that too, in terms of the percentage of time between outreach and STRIF and school closures. Those were all put together with a lot of thought in terms of the parameters you're talking about to make sure that as a now pretty much fully staffed, organization, that those priorities are communicated to staff and are reflective in their duty statement and are an ongoing topic of conversation with the Bureau and the Bureau Chief.
Thank you.
I have another question or two. Have you yet been able to get started on the part of the aspect of the job that requires you to provide assistance and information to students about how and where to file complaints?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of our data elements that we're capturing as well, is that when we get a connection with the student and they've either come to us, before the Bureau or weren't aware of the Bureau or came to us as a result of an outreach event, that's definitely built within our procedures, are to explore all of those resources depending on what the nature of that complaint may be. It's kind of like a tool within my staff's tool belt, I would say. And so, yeah, those referrals are being made whenever appropriate.
Is that something that you include as part of your presentations?
We do. Yes,
the kind
that
of
one part of our
activity
role
that-
is to help them navigate a complaint process.
In other words, before they say, I have a complaint, when you're making your presentations at these various groups, you're indicating if you have a problem,
This is the place to come.
This is where you can do it.
Yes, ma'am.
And have you engaged in helping any students yet in drafting their complaints to make sure that it has the needed information?
I'm not sure about actual drafting. It would be more making them aware of the resource, making them aware of like, for example, if it's an outside agency and they have a specific complaint form about a specific type of program, we'll take them to the form, walk them through the form in the same way we do with the STRIF application. Actually, drafting that form, I don't know if we've gone that far.
I'm sorry, I don't mean
but yeah.
drafting, but
Yeah.
exactly that. So you get them in touch with the complaint form, say, for the Bureau,
Exactly.
and then you go through, walk them through that.
You got it. Yeah, exactly what we don't want to do is just lose them in the referral process. That's like not the OSAR way, is go find this website or click on this link and we hope you find the resource. We actually handhold, for lack of a better word, and walk them through that process.
Whether it's for the Bureau's
You got it.
complaint or any other
Or even outside
agency that might
agencies.
be.
Yep, yep.
And in the documents that you send out when you get transcript requests, which document is that? Is that just the general one-page flyer?
For now, it's just the flyer, yeah, but as I mentioned, we're looking at fine-tuning that process, maybe changing the form, and maybe customizing the material that goes out. But as of now, it's just purely an awareness of OSAR.
Are most of those transcript requests from students who've gone to a school that closed?
I'd be better prepared to answer that.
Yeah, the only transcripts that we actually have are for closed schools.
Then that leads to my question of, since you have a form prepared to walk students through the closed
The
school
link.
situation, wouldn't it be wise to send that along as well?
Are you talking about the link to the video we just saw, or?
The document that you sent to us as to description of
The
closed
flyer?
school. Not the one-page
Oh,
flyer.
the closed school packet.
The closed school packet, right. So if the school is closed, wouldn't we want to be sending them the information about, what to do with when there's a closed school?
Margaret, when the schools actually close and we do the outreach to the students at that time, they receive that document.
Right, but what we've been seeing is that there seem to be thousands of students that are potentially eligible for a STRIF payment, and yet the applications we're getting are very few. And so the comment I had made last time was, isn't another time to make them remember and think about this is if they're asking for transcripts, so that you sort of do a double shot, not just at the moment it closes, but 6 months, 9 months, whatever later they say, oh, I want my transcript, or 2 weeks, whatever it is, that you include that as kind of a reminder, here are your options. That was my comment. So that's something to consider.
Thanks for that. We'll definitely look into it for sure.
Scott,
Yes.
thanks for that. I just have a couple of quick questions. Has there been a discussion about the submission of the application? I know it's something that we talked about years ago, but where it would be an electronic submission or prepaid postage envelopes or some kind of a cloud situation now that the department has a successful cloud. Is that something that has been discussed?
I don't think we've talked about it.
Not in
so,
my time.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
hasn't been discussed, but we definitely can note it.
It seems like, obviously
Like
we
with
want
a
to
scan.
decrease barriers to successful submission of applications. Obviously,
Right.
downloading is one step. Going to get a stamp any number of places is another. So we've talked about just kind of the general, it's something that California and all government faces, just being user-friendly. So I think I would just want to know what
Understood.
efforts are out there. And then,
Sarah, I just wanted to jump in on that, and that is one of the key things that we're looking for in our new IT system.
perfect, thanks. And then in terms of your discussions with K-12 students and families and military and service member and veteran folks, what kind of materials are provided, particularly at the K-12 level, but then what is provided in terms of general outreach right now? Are you,
Yeah.
obviously the statute allows for some options that the office can engage in terms of proactive
Yep.
informing and information about, schools and how to make informed decisions about school. Is that something that you're working on now, or what are you giving folks at those conversations?
Sure, yeah. In those spaces, the tangible things they walk away with are, we have a one-page flyer, and then whatever the presentation, whoever that audience is for, we customize a PowerPoint presentation that has some general talking points, but then also has some specific things to look for or consider based on that role that we're speaking to, red flags, additional recommendations about a deeper dive in terms of research, several different links to outside resources that have information that may be valuable, again, either to an exiting service member or a K-12 family. So that's provided in terms of oral presentation, and then also the PowerPoint presentation that's given on site, and then we give them access to our the information about our website as well, where a lot of those resources are housed. And this is still, we're still 10 months in kind of thing. So we're, that's a base starting point, I think, that we're definitely looking at expanding on and developing more, and partnering with other outside partners who have that information and be able to share it as well. So that's an ongoing process.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think at any point and opportunity that there is to share that, some of those materials with the committee would be helpful and informative. And then the last question, you've mentioned red flags, which are great, and I'm curious as to how those were developed and, using different partnerships, kind of where did you come up with the red flags that are out there right now? Are those memorialized? How have those been, disseminated to your folks and your staff to start looking at? Are they constantly evolving?
They're definitely constantly evolving, and as we go out and meet with these partners, that's one of the things on my list and my radar always are hearing new things, new problems that they've seen, looking at our enforcement and complaints in-house and see common things that we're hearing and seeing from students as well as just talking to students directly and engaging with students and sort of hearing their stories and the things that led them to this place where they're in a bad situation, whether it be a school where the information was misrepresented to them and then closed, or drew them to filing a complaint. So I also have, I don't think you were here last time, so I went over my background. I've also got quite a bit of experience personally as well in various capacities, working in private post-secondary institutions myself, working for the previous iteration of the Bureau as well from 2000 to 2007 as an education specialist, where I visited many schools. I also worked for the community colleges for about 10 years in various capacities. And I've also been a vocational counselor in a job retraining program where I develop contracts for individuals to go out to these schools and do exploratory research. So a lot of it are just some connections that I have, personal experiences that I've had, case management experience that I've had as well. So, but again, I would consider, when you do take a look at that, a dynamic list that has evolved even over the time that I've been here and will continue to evolve.
A really quick follow-up. So I really appreciated that video because when I tried to walk through the STRIP application with students, it can be very daunting for them. So I think the video will be very helpful for them. Just one point, maybe this is for a future iteration, but a lot of students I work with don't have their student loan documents. If they can't afford to pay them, they sort of lose track of their student loans. So two common resources that I often refer students to are the National Student Loan Database System and credit reports, which are fairly easy for students to access. And the other thing is I also work with a lot of students who have been targeted, they're non-English speakers. And so you guys are probably thinking about this, but it would be great to have these materials in other languages.
Yeah, we're working on that. And also should have mentioned before I showed it, it's closed captioned as well and ADA compliant for our students with disabilities. But yes, alternate languages are on our list as well. So I know I've gone on for a little while. The two reports that you have, just very briefly, and then I'll open it up to questions. The difference in the two reports for those who are new, the first one is entitled Student Tuition Recovery Fund Claims, and is just sort of a status of claims in the queue and being worked as of a specific date where the data was drawn down, in this case April 20th. So it's a fiscal year aggregate report from July 1 through April 20th. And then the second report is actually our quarterly report, so it covers one specific fiscal quarter, in this case January 1 through March 31st. So it's a different one difference is it's a different time period that is being covered, and one's just basically all of the elements that are required in the statute. The other is just historical data that we've given you. And so, but I think both capture a lot of the story of where we're at in terms of the number of outreach activities, the diversity of the outreach activities, and then the status of the claims that we're working. Couple things I'll highlight on the first attachment before I open up to questions. One of which is, some movement that we're proud of in terms of, if you look back at the last report comparatively, where we're making a lot of headway. If you see in that middle column that has the purple highlight, current claims, it's the status of current claims that we're working. As you can see, more than 50%, I believe it's 55%, our analysts have already completed their review and recommendation for the amount that the student is eligible for, and it's just working its way through the process. And then also the 0 under claims in queue as well. We're proud of that as well. So we have essentially no front-end backlog in that any STRIF application as of the date this was drawn down that had been submitted to the Bureau was actively being worked by an OSAR analyst. And then on the second report, again, I would say the thing that I would highlight most in terms of our last quarterly report is just the progress that's being made on the number of pending claims. It's reflective of our work and our staffing and just headway being made as we've gone from 73 pending claims as of the beginning of the year down to only 53 at the bottom of page 1 as of March 18. And those are claims that were submitted to the Bureau before OSAR came into existence. So do you have any questions on either report?
Yes. At the last meeting, I raised the issue that the statute does not authorize OSAR to process STRIF claims.
Correct.
Or make recommendations, but rather to assist students to file them so
Right.
that they can be processed then by someone in the Bureau staff, not OSAR. But I wondered where you are on making that change, or if that change is being made, because as I understand what you're reporting, it sounds as if OSAR still is processing STRIF claims rather than just assisting students.
We are assisting students, and the end result of that assistance in most cases is a recommendation to the Bureau based on that review for an amount that we believe the student is eligible for, that the Bureau then takes that handoff, validates that, reviews that, confirms that, or doesn't confirm that, depending on what the situation is. Our effort is to walk them through the application and to, like, as you mentioned, acquire the appropriate documents to validate and quantify their eligibility, and then make that and give that the result of that review to the Bureau to make the final determination.
So you're still making the recommendations?
We are confirming the amount that we believe the student is eligible for.
Right, so you're making the recommendation to the Bureau, rather than just simply assisting the student fill out their form and turning it over to the Bureau to handle. You are actually processing those up to the point of a decision being made. And then once
Not making that decision.
Once the decision is made, who is processing the payments? You are?
The State Controller's Office processes the payments. The Bureau.
Who's requesting the payments? OSAR or?
Bureau.
Bureau
The Bureau.
does.
The Bureau does the
So you're
amount
doing
and the
everything
batch.
up to the decision to.
And that's it.
And then if a student wants to appeal a decision where you've recommended they not receive a payment, are you assisting them?
We don't make any recommendation for not making payment. That is one of the changes that we made as well. So that's done through, so an initial review is done based on the basic eligibility components. The application is given to our analyst. They make the review, as you described, for what we believe based on the acquisition of those documents and working through the individual situation with that student. This is the maximum that we believe they're eligible for. We hand that over to the Bureau. They then make that review and make a final recommendation for what that amount may be. We're not making any recommendations for ineligibility or denial.
So if someone is
That holds with
requesting-
the Bureau.
Someone's requesting $5,000 and do you make recommendations to say, I think they're entitled to $2,500 rather than $5,000?
I think there could be some situations where that would happen.
Just to clarify, one of the tasks that is assigned to OSAR is to help determine the relief eligibility
Right.
of each student. And so
I'm
that's the requirement
one.
under 949.73B2, is that the office is tasked with helping students determine relief eligibility. So that is part of the process because that is a task specifically assigned to the Office of Student Assistance.
But let me be clear, Margaret, that at the end of the day, the Bureau does make the final decision on that, so don't, Scott and his team are not doing that.
I have two concerns. One is the potential conflict of interest, and the second one I have is that the OSAR is carrying out functions that I don't think are authorized by the statute. Can you, I'm not finding that in my copy of the statute. That's, I see.
94949.73. Specific B says, specific services provided by the office shall include all of the following: screening requests for assistance and providing individualized assistance to help students determine their relief eligibility. So that is part of the process, is that they are helping determine the relief eligibility.
They're helping the student determine.
Right. I mean, that's part of the process. There's interaction that goes on between the office and the student.
Okay, well, this is not a discussion to be had here, but I think we need to talk with legal counsel and/or or seek a legislative change, because I think that this potentially opens up the Bureau to litigation. Because as I understand that, it's saying to assist the student to determine, not to assist the Bureau to determine. And the concern I have about that, besides the conflict, is this office is created to have resources to help the student, not to help the Bureau reduce its workload. And that's what's happening if OSAR is actually processing those claims all the way up to the point of decision, when it should be spending that effort, working with the individual students. So those are my concerns, and I realize this is not a discussion now that we're having, but I'm very concerned that we look into this.
So what we'll do is make sure that's noted, and I'll have some further discussions about it to make sure that we're within compliance, and if not, if there needs to be changes, we will make sure those changes are made. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks, Margaret.
No reflection on you at all.
Understood.
And I
Completely.
appreciate the video you've prepared.
Good. Any other questions?
Once again, I just want to say great job to Scott and the team at OSAR. The work that you guys have all been doing in the last 10 months has been awesome, so keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Any public comment regarding OSAR?
Angela Perry, Institute for College Access and Success. Just wanted to briefly thank OSAR for all of the efforts that it has undertaken. We appreciate the increased outreach, the increased attempts to reach new student groups, and the increase in staff to help students has been tremendous. We look forward to hearing about any potential conflicts of interest or any of that, and would be happy to provide any assistance or feedback from advocates that work directly with students, if that would be helpful in any way. And that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, so we have two agenda items left. One is the status of regulations, and one is the discussion about income share agreements. But I'm going to make a recommendation that we take a 10-minute bio break. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, so it's 11:19, so let's be back at 11:30, and then I think we can actually finish the agenda before we break for the day, rather than doing a lunch break. So that'll be the goal. Thanks to you in 10 minutes.
Agents, the agent collects the amounts due from the student and then forwards that to the institution. And so the agreement, as you'll see, as an example of one of those agreements, provides that in the event of a refund, the refund goes to the agent, and what happens to it then is between the agent and the student. And that might go well and it might go not well, but the Bureau would have no reach in that case to make sure that things are done well, and consumer protections for the students are. Read the rest of the comments there, and I've made them before here, both orally and in writing. That's the essence of our concern. And so our request or recommendation is that the advisory committee weigh in as not approving or recommending these changes as they were initially stated. Questions, I'd be happy to try to respond.
Just one question. It says, looking at the attached client agreement, but I didn't get the agreement. I just got the language ahead of that. Is that something that was supposed to be provided?
No, it's that text on the bottom of page 2. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it said attached, but...
Oh, you just
Yeah, I just
selected
quoted it right
portions
here.
of it.
Yeah, I quoted the relevant portions. It's a longer agreement, goes on for 2 or 3 pages, but those are the relevant sections.
Thank you. Just to go back to what Michael and Ken were talking about before, the regulations are in, can you kind of reiterate where they are in the process so we can?
I can step in. They haven't been noticed yet. They're close to being noticed, and if we don't have your contact information, you should be on the interested parties list. You will get, it will go through the whole regular rulemaking process, public comment at the hearing, written comments to everybody, actually. And so we'll make sure that you get notice of that process when it begins.
Thank you, and you'll hear from me again.
We'll see you at the next meeting. All right. Any other public comment relating to the regulatory update? Okay. So moving on to agenda item number 7, which is a presentation and discussion about income share agreements. I believe we have a representative here to discuss, Mr. Tonio Di Sorrento. So just to preface this conversation, I made a request to the committee at our meeting in January because I have been seeing more and more from clients that I'm working with questions about income share agreements and how they can work within the Bureau structure. And so I made the recommendation that probably the best way to kind of get this process moving on the Bureau side is for someone who is an expert in this area to come and do a presentation for the committee, explain to us how income share agreements work, so we can have a discussion about it, and so the Bureau representatives that are here can kind of leave this meeting having an understanding of how an income share agreement works and what the the risks and benefits and all of the sort of pertinent information. So with that, if you would like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, and you can give us your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Tonio Di Sorrento. I'm the CEO of VMO Education, which is a leading provider of services to schools that allows them to originate and service income share agreements, also referred to as ISAs. Before I get into what an ISA is or why we think they're good for schools and students, I want to describe VMO Education. And then I'll describe an ISA generally, why we think they can help students in schools, and finally how we make sure that ISAs offered by our clients are fair and responsible for everyone involved. Education is a technology provider to post-secondary schools. Our school clients who have ISA programs include traditional nonprofit universities and colleges like Purdue University, a flagship public in Indiana, Lackawanna College in Scranton, Pennsylvania, a school that President Obama visited in 2013 and cited as a standard bearer of access and affordability, Clarkson University in New York, Messiah College in Pennsylvania, and Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, California. Education provides to its school clients the technology and expertise needed to offer income share agreements to students, which includes knowledge on designing ISA programs, a technology platform to present ISAs and related disclosures to students, servicing income share agreements after they are originated by the school. And servicing includes receiving income-related information to determine students' payment obligations and receiving the payments themselves on behalf of the schools. Education has no financial stake in the schools or in the income share agreements. Our fees are paid by our school clients and not by students. VMO Education is not a party to income share agreements. When we construct income share agreement programs, the ISAs run between students and the school. So into income share agreements, an ISA is an agreement where a school credits an amount of tuition to a student's account in exchange for the student's promise to pay a percentage of their post-graduation income over a specified period of time. Income share agreements have been favorably written about by a multitude of organizations and stakeholders, including the Academy of Arts and Sciences Commission on the Future of Undergraduate Education, the College Promise Campaign, the Aspen Institute's Future of Work Initiative, the Urban Institute, the Progressive Policy Institute, Sheila Baer, former chair of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and ISAs have been endorsed by the editorial boards of USA Today and Bloomberg View. If done properly, income share agreements can help schools opt into a new outcomes-based accountability regime, which is something we think is needed for an industry that has all too often gotten away with not producing valuable enough outcomes for its students. ISAs can increase educational access and opportunity for students who would otherwise be unable to attend a school for financial reasons. For example, not every student or prospective student has the ability to pay tuition up front, but also not every student or prospective student has the ability to get a loan, either because they have bad credit or no credit, or have no credit-worthy cosigner. Income share agreements make sure that schools have the right incentive to ensure their graduates get jobs that pay a fair salary. With upfront tuition or loans, a school gets paid regardless of its success, which creates a misaligned incentive structure and allows schools to get away with not producing valuable enough outcomes for their students. ISAs help alleviate a debt-to-income ratio for graduates. Research from the Institute for Women's Policy Research shows that Hispanic women earn 62 cents in the dollar compared to white men for the same job. African American women make 65 cents on the dollar. With a loan, the severe racial and gender salary discrimination in the labor market reinforces existing debt-to-income ratios for financing post-secondary education. While not a silver bullet for this problem, because ISAs are income-based payment, they help alleviate higher debt-to-income ratios due to gender and racial discrimination in the workplace. Also, themselves prefer ISAs to other options in some cases, and academic research from higher education policy professors at Vanderbilt University provided the first ever empirical research that loan aversion causes massive underinvestment in post-secondary education. The research found that if institutions offered income share agreements, there would be an uptick in enrollment, persistence, and attainment for underrepresented populations. Themselves may be risk averse and what we would call debt averse. Even if they may qualify for loans, they may be concerned that they may lose their job or get a lower paying job, in which case they may underinvest in education. And students may be planning to take a public interest or other low paying job, in which case they may be worried about their ability to repay a loan. Fairness is critical to VMO education and to its school clients. We support any regulation that helps ensure fairness. Today, VMO education insists that its clients include significant consumer protections in every income share agreement that it originates or services. Categorically, these include payment caps, a minimum income threshold, a maximum payment term, no control over a graduate's post-graduation choices, clear disclosures, and interactive financial literacy. And I'll just explain what each of those things mean. All income share agreements that VMO originates include a payment cap, which is the maximum amount that a student will be required to pay under the income share agreement, regardless of the student's income. Once a student hits the payment cap, they have no further obligation to pay anything. It ensures that schools invest in student success, rather than simply hope they can hit the jackpot with one or two students who go on to become extremely wealthy. All institutions that VMO Education partners with include minimum income thresholds in their ISAs. This guarantees that graduates don't have to make payment when they're in economic hardship or don't have a salary. Minimum income threshold is the amount below which a student does not have to make any payments at all, I should say. And this ensures, again, that students aren't forced to choose between paying for necessities and making an ISA payment. Because ISAs don't have principal balance that accrue interest, if a graduate is earning below the minimum income threshold and not making payments, the amount they owe on the ISA does not increase, which contrasts with negative amortization on loans. This is an inherently progressive feature of ISAs. Every VMO ISA clearly lists how long the payment obligation lasts or extends. Once a payment term ends, no further payments are required, even if the student hasn't paid anything at all because they never earned in excess of the minimum income threshold. Education ISAs do not give a school any right to control any aspect of a student's post-graduation lives. There's no requirement to take any specific job or even to look for a job, and there is no requirement to reside in any specific location. In each ISA, VMO Education clearly discloses the percentage of post-graduation income that will be paid, the number of monthly payments that will be required, the amount of tuition being credited to the student's account in exchange for entering the ISA, and the payment cap. After being provided with this information, students are given 30 days to accept the income share agreement, and once they accept, students are given at least 3 more days to cancel the ISA if they change their minds. VMO Education strongly believes that financial literacy is critical when it comes to student finance and how to pay for education. We are building a tool right now that will require of our school clients that will ensure prospective students are able to demonstrate financial literacy and an understanding of the terms of their respective ISA for each given school. We would be really happy to work with the Bureau and seek its guidance and input to ensure adequate financial literacy measures are in place. For protections in place for VMO Education ISAs, we believe that all schools using income share agreements and all ISA vendors should implement similar student or consumer protections and ensure that we have best practices for our industry. We are very happy to be here today, very happy to work with the Bureau in any capacity, and also to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Sounded like Elvis right there. So I'm sure we have lots of questions. Margaret is chomping at the bit over here. Go ahead, Margaret. Oh, okay. Hey, I get to go. So I know, Tony, you've been sitting here through this whole meeting, so you got to hear some of the conversation about the Student Tuition Recovery Fund and OSAR and all the things that are kind of going on to protect students if a school closes. So I understand that and this was something that I didn't quite get until recently, that VMO is helping to service an agreement between the student and the school, but you're not fronting any money. So the student is essentially getting a credit to their account for the amount of the tuition, but the school is not getting any of that money up front. All of this, the money that they receive from the ISA comes after the student finishes their program. So there's, at the point at which, let's say for the sake of argument, students enter an ISA, a student enters an ISA, and the school closes halfway through the student's program. The student at that point has not put any money down because they haven't paid anything, but they have this instrument that is tied to their post-completion. How would you handle that? How would you deal with an ISA that if a student is unable to complete their program, then they would never have a certificate, diploma, or whatever to help them get a job? So I suppose you could make the argument they won't have an income related to it, but I would like to understand how you'd handle that. The other piece is if a student withdraws, and a student has, they get halfway through a program, they've signed an ISA, they would have, from the Bureau's perspective, incurred 6 months worth of tuition, but they haven't paid anything. What will they owe on the ISA if they withdraw before they actually spend what the tuition would have cost? So two separate questions.
Yes, Madam Chair. With respect, I think both of these incorporate or end up referencing a particular state's refund regulations for their schools. For each VMO client, we design this piece of the program with reference to that. And so we would be looking at a school's refund policy, when's tuition earned, what point, at what points is partial or full tuition earned by a school. The schools have their own policies, but they're always in reference to state regulation law. And you're right, no money changes hands between a student and a school. But there are times when a student may have gotten much of the benefit of the education and would therefore have at least a partial commitment to make payments on the income share agreement. For example, if they withdraw 3/4 of the way through a really valuable course of study because they got a great job. The employer might not have wanted to wait for them to finish. They get a great job, they got good value, and in that case, again, at VMO we don't author these. We just incorporate the school's existing policies, and and the amount of the ISA that's owed would be equivalent to the amount of tuition that would have been owed in terms of proportionally.
So you basically would prorate the
Prorate
tuition
that.
just as you would if you were issuing a regular refund. So the student's ISA is going to be just for the amount that they would have owed based on how far they attended or how long they attended into the program?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So what about in a situation with a school closure? How would you handle that?
We similarly would be passengers to whatever the state regulation was, that particular situation. So if there is, for example, an instance where tuition should have been refunded or was never owed, a complete defense to payment, that would also be incorporated into the ISA program. And so a school closure where students would not have owed any tuition or would have been entitled to refunds, they simply have their obligation canceled.
So in a situation where a school closure occurs, would you or VMO be open to working with OSAR to determine what, if any, money might be owed? Or because one of the things that OSAR does, or the Bureau does in conjunction with the OSAR, is to determine if they can help a student alleviate a debt that's unrelated to cash that they put forth. So one of the things that they may be seeking is assistance on figuring out how to get the student out of an ISA if the school closes. Is that something that VMO would be open to communicating with OSAR about?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. We're here, even though we're not a school, because we feel like we understand that we need to work very closely with people who regulate schools to help programs be successful.
Thank you. All right, Margaret.
I have a lot of questions. First one is, do you have sample agreements that you could provide to us?
I don't have one with me, Madam Vice Chair, but we can get you one.
Okay, if you would, you can just provide it to the Bureau, and the Bureau will get it around to all of us. And if you could give us, if you have a variety of them, several would be better than one. I think that would be helpful for us. Second question I have, and I excuse the ignorance of this question, but what exactly does VMO do for the school, and how exactly does the school pay VMO?
I'd love to answer that. Income share agreement is, it's a contract to pay tuition later based on a graduate's future income. And that's not something that any school we've worked with had experience with before. So to understand what they can realistically expect to happen with their graduates and how that can be packaged and disclosed in a way that's student friendly and supports the school's mission strategically, it requires, we found it requires, and our clients have found requires devoted expertise. So we spend a lot of time designing the terms. What's the right number of months of payment? What's the right % of income? What's the right payment cap? And what's the right minimum income? And that varies greatly. If you could think, for example, a school, we have Purdue University as a client, center of the country, someone there studying in a course of study that's likely to work locally is going to have lower nominal wages, even if they have a great outcome, than somebody with equivalent from Point Loma Nazarene in San Diego, where California has higher nominal wages, or the coasts have higher nominal wages. So we have to be considerate about that. Schools aren't experts in that. Our schools are experts at being schools, and they want to do the right thing. These are schools who are investing in student upward economic mobility, in the training and placement that many students are trying to buy when they're buying a credential from a school. But they need help to construct these thoughtfully. I think there's a lot of value in that, Madam Vice Chair. But the other thing we do is, two big things. We monitor graduates' incomes. So we have to verify incomes and ensure their incomes are reported back to the school, and that their payments are adjusted, and then we have to collect the money for the school. Again, none of our school clients are experts in those things. I'd say the last valuable thing, and we're to this point with some of our clients, that we're entering our third academic year at Purdue University, for example, is adjusting these to make sure that it's succeeding, the programs are succeeding for students. Oh, and we're paid, I should say, sorry, we're paid out of proceeds. So meaning we don't try to make students or schools pay us up front. We let schools pay us on a monthly basis as we administer these programs for graduates.
So as the school is paid by the students, a percentage goes to you?
It's often just a flat monthly fee we negotiate with the school.
Your answer raised another question then. Because incomes are different in different parts of the country, let's say you have a school that's offering distance education all over the country for the same price, but the incomes are lower in a certain part of the country, let's say the Midwest. To deal with that, does that mean people in that area pay a higher percentage of their income or have a longer term? Or how does that differ then, given the lower incomes expected?
Madam Vice Chair, that's a really thoughtful, we should probably revert on that also. We've not had a chance to design one of those yet. So our school clients today are, I think, almost entirely in person. And so,
okay.
But we expect that to come up.
Yep, it will, I'm sure. The schools that you're working with now, you said there is a cap. Can you give me an example of, say, a school that charges, let's say, $30,000 tuition, and what a cap would be on that, and how would that compare to, say, the principal and interest owed if instead they had a normal loan payment?
Absolutely. An example I can give from Purdue University, they run I would say, I'll preface this by saying that we use the word income share agreement, and we use the same know-how and technology to do two different things for our school clients. One is replace private education loans on a campus where that's a mission of the school to reduce private education borrowing. And the other would be as a tuition replacement where the course of study is linked very closely to a specific employment outcome, and that's a great way then to charge the tuition. And so an example I can give from Purdue University that's public is they have a program that's intended to replace PLUS and private loans or to supplement them for aid-eligible students in need of gap financing. And at that school then, percent of income that someone pays and the duration is intended across the group of students who participate in the program to be about the same as what the same group of students would have paid under a federal PLUS loan, for they and their families. And in that case, the cap on that program is 2.5 times the initial amount advanced. The average payment is going to be closer to 1.4 to 1.5 times the amount advanced. And some people are clearly going to pay zero or very, very much less than was advanced. So the distribution of payments is similar to what you might see in a PLUS loan pool, where some people prepay quickly, some people extend their payment term and let their interest grow. The difference is that in the loan pool, the people who pay the most are the ones who earn the least, because they can't prepay. They're in the program extending their payments, paying the most interest. And in the ISA pool, the people who earn the most are the ones who pay the most, because it's an income-based payment. But that's an example of one we run for a college. Another program we run, though, is intended, I'll give another example. I think at Point Loma Nazarene, our payment cap is 1 times the amount of tuition, and the school just understands that this is, when the school administers this, it's a form of financial aid to students, and it's not intended to displace loans as much as to help people at that particular school graduate who are out of ability to borrow. In both cases, you can see that we're designing programs for our school clients that are incremental to federal student loans. And we have to be considerate of what's likely to happen with the graduates and their existing loan burdens from other borrowing they've done to get their credential. Those are 2 examples, Madam Vice Chair.
What percentage of the person's income would they have to pay in any of those examples?
So that would vary, but I can tell you the things that are inputs to that. So, for example, we look at a person's geography, because that's a nominal input. We look at time to graduation, expected time to graduation, and then the general course of study, which would include, at Purdue, for example, there are something like 92 academic majors. We only had 3 or 4 course of study groups that lead to specific early career paths. And designing then something where people don't subsidize across groups, but within groups. And therefore, long answer to your question, but the percent of income that we're setting there is intended then to be fair across all groups. We've seen it Purdue that it's perceived as fair by students because we have equal representation of STEM, non-STEM, male, female, and in-state, out-of-state, 8 eligible students participating. We have to consider the total debt burden or total payment burden that can be allocated to education before a person experiences hardship in other areas of their lives. Although the payment duration, the length of payment, VMO is always shorter than the standard federal student loan payment term. We don't want people overburdened, even if it's a rip the Band-Aid off experience at any point. So what we think about is what's the right payment percent in term to be fair to the school or to hit the school strategic objective without overburdening somebody, Madam Vice Chair, which means if we're thinking about federal student loans being a certain percentage of their income, we know there's a maximum that a person can afford to pay before their lifestyle choices start being impacted or before they start exhibiting signs of distress. We limit the amount of the percents of income they can have in an ISA. So we would be comfortable at VMO with something at 10% or 15% or 18% of a person's income if that represents the value of the school and it looks like they can afford that. But there are times when we look at what is already happening at a school and the existing debt burdens and payments people will make, and we have to limit the percent of income to something lower.
So you determine this on an individual basis?
Don't determine it on an individual basis, but we do determine it on a school-by-school basis, and sometimes within a very big school, but on a program-by-program basis.
If a person already has an income-based repayment under which they're paying, I guess, up to maximum of 10% or something, then what do you figure they can pay on top of that? In other words, let's say you have two students, same school, same program, one has, massive federal loans and the other one doesn't, but they're still paying the same percent on the income dependent?
Could be, Madam Vice Chair, if they took the exact same amount and were in a similar program or in similar time to graduation.
No, I mean the percentage, regardless of the amount.
Right, but I think that what we would see is that the person with no other borrowing would be eligible for a greater amount of income share agreement. And so if they both took the same amount, they'd have the same percent of income payment, but we would have capped the eligibility of somebody. We don't want people to overburden themselves. So we would cap the eligibility of someone who already has a lot of borrowing. And we'd be honest with the school that this person can't afford to.
So the percentage varies by the amount of the, I'll call it a
tuition
loan.
credit.
Okay. And the maximum that your agreements have so far is a percentage of income?
I think is the maximum that we would be comfortable with is 20%, which is in the case of if you could think of a school where it's a short course of study, it's not there's no other student loan borrowing, and the payment term is very short. And the idea then is that a person can complete payment. And you could think of a person who's here from an international student with a 3-year work visa. Really, we have to limit the payment term to 3 years. So we would let that person pay a lot, but it gives them access to education they couldn't otherwise get, and therefore, expands their access to it.
And what kind of credit analysis is done of the student to determine whether or not this agreement will be made available to them?
This is something I probably should have put in my testimony. At VMO, we feel like we're changing how people are viewed and how schools compete from inputs to outputs. Or from who you were before school to who you were after school. So VMO does not have any form of pricing or knockout based on FICO scores. And we don't have variable pricing based on individual risk.
Because I assume you're not basing it on whether or not the student has a history of being able to pay, but based on whether or not they get a good job that they can have money to pay, right? So you're not.
There are people who you're not helping when you give additional obligations to, right? So there's some people who the eligibility should be limited. They already have too much debt and they can't afford this, or they've maybe just defaulted on a ton of debt to the same school, and that's there's things that aren't good that are people we would tell a school you shouldn't do more of this for everybody's good. But I think what lets us do that is that we're not VMO doesn't own income share agreements. We're not trying to print contracts and make money from investors as quickly as we can. We're trying to help our schools admit and graduate and place the students that they want and get credit for it. Because today, when schools are competing for students, they're advertising and they're marketing about, they're making claims, but we're going to provide them with granular outcomes data. We're measuring what happened. Purdue University is going to be able to publish what happened to the people who took VMO ISAs, and we're counting this stuff, and that's the right way for a school to compete for students who care about a job, for example, upward economic mobility. And so when we work with a school who gets value from that, whether they have a state legislative funding formula that supports it, or whether it's their nonprofit mission to serve certain people, we're able to disregard some of the individual risk-based pricing that lenders get hung up on, I would say. The source of value in these is helping the schools succeed and these schools, and not in optimizing for how many pennies will come back.
Schools generally rely on getting the money as the student is getting their education. Do the schools, what source do the schools have to get the money for the tuition, for the education they're providing to pay their teachers, et cetera, at that time before the payments start kicking in?
We've seen clients do this 3 different ways so far. One would be that some of our schools are endowed, and their endowment does this, exchanges money with the school and fronts money, basically, the working capital that would have been there for income share agreements. We also have schools who are doing this, maybe a big school who says, look, there's people who want to be at the school. Maybe it's a Title IV eligible program where the students who are applying are themselves not Title IV eligible because they had a prior felony conviction or used all their federal aid in their teens and 20s and meandered maybe. Now they really need to come through, or even dreamers. So we have schools that'll look at that and say, well, they're going to have a program of a certain size. They'll let this tuition be charged this way, but they'll limit it to a number of students that they can afford to wait for payment. So they use their own working capital and balance sheet them. The third thing we've seen schools do is borrow against it. So schools all today, they can borrow against something like dormitory revenue or cafeteria revenue to support current operations. When they agree to get paid later for tuition, they can borrow against income share agreement cash flows. This, back to your question earlier though, Madam Chair, about refunds and withdrawals, the issue then is between the investor and the school and not between a student and a school or a student and an investor. So, but those are the 3 things we've seen, Madam Vice Chair.
Who are the lenders you're seeing? Are these commercial banks or private capital, or what kind of lenders are willing to do that?
We've seen at VMO impact investors, philanthropies, and we're starting to see some traditional market participants. I think, what I think a lot of the market wanted to, the broader market wants to see is some performance history. They want to see that schools who do this are healthy and succeed, and that students enter these contracts and have good outcomes and good careers. So today, the majority of financing activity is done with impact investors or, again, philanthropies or mission-oriented investors like, for example, in Indiana, the State Student Loan Agency investor in the Purdue program.
From your description, you have put in various controls, limits, whatever, to try to do a product from what you're explaining that is not a burdensome product on students. Obviously, if this kind of thing were to be available generally, as we know from past experience, we would have the bad actors as well as the good actors. Are there recommendations you would care to make, which you may not, as to the kind of, if we were to say, yeah, this works, what kind of limits there should be on these various aspects of, caps, thresholds, percentages, et cetera? Or do you think there should be such limits?
We would support such limits, Madam Vice Chair. We don't have a business to run if this category is spoiled by people who are out for something short-sighted. I think ideas would be, letting schools, I think, first of all, boundaries on the kinds of contracts make sense. Boundaries on the consumer protection categories that I discussed would make a lot of sense. Maybe helpful guidance for schools as they are considering this kind of program. Guidance as to whether a school should attempt to operate one of these themselves versus work with someone who's focused on it, an expert on it. Some examples of consumer protection terms can be found in a draft bill in the U.S. House. It has bipartisan co-sponsorship. And I don't have a copy of it with me, but I can furnish that to the Bureau also, Madam Vice Chair. It goes through things like what would be a maximum allowable percentage of income to be committed, what's a maximum allowable payment cap, and so my answer is yes, I think that this only works long-term and stays healthy long-term if it works well for schools and if the people who are involved in regulating schools give a lot of input, and in protecting consumers, give input into what's sensible.
One other question is that we have seen that in some of the massive school failures or fraudulent conduct or whatever reason failed, that there have been schools, there is a federal limit that says you have to get at least 10% of your income from something other than the federal student loan program. So we've seen schools upping their tuition and then giving so-called grants and loans, or requiring students to take out private loans in order to show that they have 10% of their income elsewhere. Now, one break on that is, if regulators actually find that and, track it down and so forth. Another break on that is school failures cause lenders to be less interested in making those kind of loans. Do we not run the risk that since you are now making it possible for creditors to say, well, here's a way we would get paid, to encourage that kind of behavior?
I think there are two categorical answers to that, Madam Vice Chair. On the one hand, assuming this was done completely sincerely by any school, there's not going to get paid unless their graduates succeed. So
we can't assume that, so.
Right. So, but what I'm saying, so
we have to deal with all kinds of schools.
Your school, it might be a school that's got a bad rap today, or a school that's in a category that's disfavored today. But if they are doing a good job, that'll show, because we're going to count what happened. They're going to get paid for success, and that'll feed. Maybe that changes their perception for them, and this is a way for a school like that to redeem itself or reclassify itself. For a school that did this insincerely, who more of a 90-10 workaround, and I'm familiar with that rule. We would have to be watchful for that here at VMO. I mean, I think that's not happened here, and it doesn't seem like it would be a typical story, but that would be a thing to look for, and it might be a component of any bureau guidance from the Bureau for schools that it regulates. I think some kind, considering to go into something more technical, I mean, accounting and revenue recognition for these. If there was, we're telling people what we expect will happen. So if we're forecasting that no money's coming back, the school can't write that down. It's the 10 and the 90-10, or the 15 and the 85-15. The school wouldn't be able to count that as money. Unfortunately, with loans, they do count it as money because it actually showed up as money. The school's not the owner if it's not from an affiliate, and so it's treated a little differently. I think so. So I think this is less susceptible. It's not constructed as a hack on 90-10, the 90-10 rule, but we would have to be watchful for that. And at VMO, we certainly won't be taking any clients where that's the purpose of the program. No one with any of these can make enough money from doing it wrong in one or two places to justify jeopardizing the rest of our really great college clients who have no issues with this and want to serve them for a long time.
And one last question, and that is, I'm assuming you have both attorneys and accountants on staff. Is that correct?
We have one attorney and one accountant.
One of each.
Have you looked at any legal restrictions there might be on agreeing to encumber future income?
Yes. Yes, and I can speak to this a little. My prior life, I was an attorney.
Recovering?
Prior life, Marine Corps artillery. So deaf and risk averse or whatever. But yes. So there are, and I think, Madam Vice Chair, you're thinking maybe about the category of wage garnishment or assignments of wages. There are broad
Different
prohibitions on
means.
assignments of wages at the federal and state level. And the defining pieces of those would be that they're not completely contingent in that they involve the employer. And they're all, so what we have is something very different. If you could think of an income share agreement as two things. It could be when you graduate and succeed, you make payments. You could also be, look, this school's valuable, it costs money. At Point Loma Nazarene, we have a cap of the tuition. This is just need-based aid awarded in time of actual need. When you have, they do the game today in college where they award need-based aid based on whose parents made more money before they applied or the year before they applied in prior year financial aid formulas. And instead now we're going to see people have discounts to what they owe by demonstrated financial need when they're earning below the amount that would cause them to hit the tuition payment that they received, the tuition credit they received. And so we have looked at that, but it's a very different category of financial product, and if that's the word for this, very different category from something that would give rise to assignment of wages comparisons.
And just one sec. So on 9010, I just wanted to jump in, but you had gone to the next question. So on 9010, and just to be clear, 9010 is cash basis and is money received. So if this was supposed to be a 9010 sort of patch, it's not going to do the school any good unless the student actually makes payments, gets a job and makes payments, because they cannot count that up, like sort of fronting of the money onto the student's ledger as 10 money, because just like with any institutional funding, the school cannot count that money towards their 10 money until they actually receive it from the student. So in the sense of like, well, we need to make up for the 10, so we're going to have the student do an ISA for 10 grand, and we're going to put 10 grand as a payment on there. You can't do that, because that 10 grand payment is not from the student. Until the student makes the payments to the school, that's when that becomes 10 money. So it doesn't really, it doesn't open itself really to the opportunity of using that to try to mask a 90-10 problem, because you're not going to get any of that cash until the student gets a job and starts paying. So I just wanted to jump in.
No, I appreciate that. And I mean, I offer the 90-10 example because that's a common reason, I think, why schools do that. But schools also, because of the way the market works, are often able to increase their tuition above the federal student loan limit and still get the money if there are lenders willing to lend them the money. And if lenders now find, yes, we'll loan the money because of this kind of product, does that mean that we are, in fact, encouraging schools to increase tuition above the student loan limits, apart from the 90-10? 90-10 is one reason I think some schools do that. But I had one more question, which I forgot, but thank you very much for your indulgence. I really appreciate that. I am completely ignorant on this, and I need a lot more information, I think, before I have any further thoughts, but your information has been very helpful. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. How do institutions treat this as far as generally accepted accounting principles, for example, on their balance sheet? Is it a receivable, an asset which is an account receivable, or how is it accounted?
While we do have an accountant on our staff, we don't give accounting advice. Our clients all have their own recognition principles and their own advisors for this, but generally it's revenue can be recognized when risk is transferred or payments made. So either cash shows up, or if a school borrows against it without recourse, I don't know who would do that deal today, but then they would be able to recognize the amount that they received early and then wait to recognize the rest. So it's a little disadvantaged today in terms of revenue recognition versus a loan-based system. But I think if we establish a good performance history for these in the schools who do it are successful, then I think the market will be a little maybe a little more open-minded about it, and maybe in terms of GAAP, that we'll be able to get more favorable guidance for schools. That's probably a little way off.
Understood. Appreciate the thoughtful analysis you've done in regards to school payments as a percentage of income. Obviously, you described the high number of variables that have bearing on that. I'm curious, given the federal gainful employment standard of a one-size-fits-all 8%, how does that fit and square with your analysis of different types of institutions and different types of programs and the debt burden that graduates would be willing to pay before, in your words, they experience hardship?
I love that question, Mr. Holt. We do our own math here, and we're not referencing gainful employment at VMO. We're doing what we think is right in each case for each school, but we do, I would say, stepping back from the VMO seat to just conceptually talk about income share agreements when schools use us for them. We have here for-profit, nonprofit, public schools opting into something like gainful employment, only more strict because they actually don't get paid if it doesn't work. And so they're going to have to be transparent about what happened. They can't deny what happened. We're counting it and giving them the numbers, so there's no more ignorance. They literally don't get paid if their graduates don't succeed, and if they were succeeding in borrowing against it for one cohort of students, like in the future, nobody's going to want to lend against it if there's not great outcomes. So I think in the absence of federal action on schools, that weekend, right? We've seen schools get a lot more space from the federal government the last year and a half. Their VMO clients are opting into actually a stricter form of gainful employment for at least some of their students. So I feel very good about that. I don't know that it's the same or an appropriate substitute. I think they have different purposes. And of course, when our schools do this, this is a tool for them to use with students. They don't require it of students, and so it won't always be representative of the entire student body. But we are going to have good outcomes data coming back. This is representative of real risk sharing by schools, and it is representative of a commitment to not overburden graduates in the same way that gainful employment wanted schools to do that.
And not a question, just an observational comment that in one sense our public investment in higher education and state and federal taxes are sort of one large income share agreement writ large, right? Because we, and through our income and progressive tax systems, we pay for education indirectly.
Income tax is an example, and I think the pay-as-you-earn federal student loan repayment plan is a place where the concept won out. It doesn't have anything to get schools to behave in students' best interest as a part of that. So it protects consumers, but doesn't reward schools for doing the right thing. Yes, sir.
Hi. So I wanted to go back to payment caps because I wasn't clear if the payment cap just applied to their monthly payment or to the payment overall for the contract.
Mrs. Tsui, the payment, the percentage of income people pay an annualized percentage of income that we take down to a monthly payment, and they make that payment every month unless there's something wrong or their income has changed. Like they re-enroll in school. There's life events that cause deferment. But when we use the word payment cap, we mean the lifetime maximum amount a person can pay. So that means even if they're very successful, they won't be taken advantage of.
So how is that lifetime payment cap determined? Is there any relation to the tuition amount that was credited to the school?
There is, in that we coach schools toward something. So based on what they're trying to accomplish. So at Purdue University, where they're trying to mimic what would be a plus and private loan pool with an income share agreement program, we look at what that would likely pay across all the students who took it, and then we try to construct an ISA program that will return the same amount dollar for dollar relative to the tuition that's advanced. The difference is the distribution of payments is different, and the cap there then is 2.5 times the tuition because the most successful people have to pay that amount to let the least successful people advance their full tuition and keep the program balancing. At other clients, we have something, we'll say a 1x cap. We'll say, look, this is really a kind of need-based aid. You're just going to wait and see who has need. So we'll say the most they'll ever pay is the sticker price, but if they have lower incomes, they won't owe as much. And so we would easily say this is a 1x program or a 2x program or a 1.5x program. We don't have any programs that cap payments at less than the sticker price of the institution. So 1x or 1.5x, and that's a really common way for us to talk about those with our clients.
So it sounds like if they hit the cap, then they no longer have to, the lifetime cap, they no longer have to continue paying.
That's right. So if you had an income share agreement that had a 7-year payment term, but you were very successful and paid your cap in 3 years, you're done.
So are there things that would extend the payment term? For example, like, what if someone goes to grad school after taking out this kind of program from college? They still don't have income because they're going to school. Is it deferred?
Yes. So, well, it depends on the school program, but we design these, deferment is one of the things we would use in designing a program. So if you have a school where they want to use income share agreements, but a lot of the value proposition of the school itself is that it gets you into grad school, it's silly to try to take money from people who you know are going to go to grad school. It makes more sense to say, let's wait until they finish and then take a percentage of income for a certain number of years. And what we do, so on the one hand, for things that are pretty expected and pretty bounded in terms of time, we would have maybe a 5-year payment term with up to 2 years of extension. Whereas after you've used all of that extension time, it ends anyway. So there's not a thing where it follows people forever, or where they owe money. And I'll give a really specific example. If you had a 6-year income share agreement where the cap on payment was $20,000, and you spent 4 years in the middle of that in medical school, and there was a maximum extension of 4 years, you'd make 72 monthly payments. It might take you 120 months. And at the end of that, if you had only paid $15,000, the ISA would end. And if at any point you hit the cap, the ISA would also end.
And is a disability treated similarly?
It's somewhat similar. If you actually have lower income, then the minimum income threshold itself, if you're not working, that takes care of it in its own way. I mean, you just would exit the back end of the time window if you're permanently disabled. Temporarily disabled, you just have a lower payment for a while and you come back to earning capacity.
So I have a question about, like, what if you've assessed that a person, based on their income, should be paying X amount, but the student comes back to you and says that's actually not affordable for them because they have these other financial obligations that you haven't considered?
You have to work that out with the schools. So one advantage of, I think, programs built around schools like we do at BMO is that no school wants a bad story about that graduate. They don't want to they want their alumni to be happy and think well of the school. And they know that they have communities of graduates so that talk to each other. So if there was merit to that, I don't believe that exact thing has come up here, but I would be really surprised if a school didn't ask us to please make that accommodation. If a school said, you really have to try to take that money, I suppose it's our job, but that's, it's because at some point, people could rationalize a lot of things, I think, but expect the school to be really accommodating there.
But what if they're not?
Then this is an obligation. So
So do you do your own debt collection or
not, and that's not something that's come up here yet. I mean, we haven't had an occasion to do that or talk about debt collection, but we do not do our own. So it means if a person's a willing payer, or we can work something out for the school, we do. And beyond that, this belongs to the school, and the school would have to decide. I think you all probably have schools that you regulate who occasionally have students who owe them tuition that's unpaid past a certain time, and they have to resolve that. And I would guess that each school has their own approach to those things.
Okay, so in the situation where a student is deemed to be an unwilling payer, it sounds like you haven't encountered that situation, but are you servicing that account? Do you return it to the school for a decision on how
We'd have to ask the school what they would like us to do. That would extend, I mean, there's time. So that people, sometimes they move, they could be unresponsive for any reason or have some temporary hardship, 30, 60, 90 days. I think that at some point, this is less about a temporary hardship and more about somebody's just not going to pay. And in that case, we'd have to ask the school what they'd like to do.
So I raise this because what I've seen with private student loans and sometimes with federal loans that are made by the school is that the school might be unwilling to work with the student based on their income, and then they get sent to debt collection. And a lot of debt collectors in this area don't have the greatest track record in terms of consumer protections. But it sounds like you haven't encountered that situation yet.
There are two things that at least mitigate from even before we get to it, which would be to the extent somebody was in collection with a loan because they didn't have any money, they actually don't owe anything on an income share agreement. So as long as they're just reporting to us they don't have money, they're not earning it, or they're below that minimum income threshold, they're actually building credit. We can furnish to a credit bureau they're fully performing as they progress through that hardship period. They can get something good out of that. If they're earning over the minimum income threshold, their payment will be very small if it's low income. If they're very high income and just this isn't a priority, that's a less sympathetic person. I think that you don't often see in private student loan default cases or federal student loan default cases, although if they did have a compelling hardship, even as a high income person, I could picture somebody who had a six-figure income, but maybe lost health insurance and had a catastrophic health issue. We don't claim the shield in bankruptcy that federal student loans claim for income share agreements. So a person who could show a court that they were experiencing real hardship, even if they had high income, would be able to get this modified or discharged.
Well, I appreciate you answering these questions. It's been very informative.
Do you have another question?
Now that's raised some more questions for me. Okay, so in bankruptcy, you said you don't claim the shield if they have a hardship. Is that the only basis on which, under these contracts, they could get a discharge in bankruptcy? Because that is the federal shield if they have a hardship. But are you saying that basically this would be treated like any other consumer debt, not necessarily like a student loan?
Today, income share agreements don't have any special treatment in bankruptcy, but one does not simply ask for bankruptcy either. So they have to show, hardship is a showing a person has to make to get bankruptcy in any case.
Well, not hardship. They have to show lack of assets.
That's right.
Yeah, but, and I understood earlier that what you did was prepare these contracts, but now from this conversation, I'm understanding you also service the collection. I see. Okay. And then how does the minimum income threshold that you use compare to the federal poverty levels?
So in every school sets their own minimum income threshold, and we try to, this can vary because sometimes minimum income threshold is about making sure nobody who is near poverty is put further into hardship. Other times it's about making sure that students can see in a school that the school is very serious about a certain kind of job. So if a school had a minimum income threshold of $40,000, that's more about saying you don't get the kind of job out of this school that pays less than $40,000, and here's how we know you don't have to pay. Whereas if it's $20,000, it's more about saying if you have real hardship, you won't have an obligation. Every VMO, the lowest, I think, the lowest minimum income threshold we have for any client is at Purdue, which is, again, it's Indiana, but it's $20,000, and that is it's a little bit higher than the minimum income threshold for pay as you earn. So if you had a federal student loan, they do 1.5 times a federal poverty level, beneath which you make no payment. And at Purdue, they just went a little bit higher than that.
And then, I think you've already said this, but just to confirm, so a student has, 2 or 3 federal loans, and they get the income-based repayment, which sucks up all of their disposable income. Nevertheless, this loan would still have minimum payments on top of that.
That's right. An income share agreement.
Unless it was their income were below your threshold.
Yes, yeah. The percentage of income is incremental to the percentages paid on something like pay as you earn. So you can see that there would be schools would sensibly limit the size of an income share agreement or the size of the amount of percentage of income that a graduate could obligate themselves to when designing these.
And then I understand there's an overall cap, and I think you said there's also a time limit.
Yes.
What are your time limits generally?
Usually we think about two things. We're thinking about balancing the payment obligation and making sure it's affordable, but also trying to get it over with, because a big complaint people have about student loans is that they're out there forever. And our schools think that their graduates will long-term be happier if they're not making payments for a long time. So we try to take the highest percent of income that doesn't mess with anything to accelerate payment and get people out of that phase of their lives of paying for school. Madam Vice Chair, there was an important part of your question that I just completely forgot. Would you?
I can see why. Poor person, you've been just grilled here for a long time. What's the range of time limits you set?
So then we're designing a program, we're aiming for a certain time, and we would normally say the maximum time is about 1.5 that number of months. So if we say 48 payments is the right number of payments, then we would say 1.5, 72 payments is the right maximum time, and that 72 months, I'm sorry, to make 48 payments. And that way a person going into this can know that it really will end. They can, it's not some indefinite lien on their lives. And also, I think it's important. Most schools know this, but it's not realistic to take credit for what somebody's doing decades later out of an undergraduate institution and try to tax that. We think that our school clients should rightly be focused on the early career paths of people who've come about those, because the school can actually control that.
So right now, just give me a range of the ones you've set up.
36 months on the low end to 120 months.
And just as an example, if it's helpful, I've seen a few of your agreements from my clients. And similar almost to like a TILA disclosure. It has a chart on it that says, so look, just for argument, I'll make these up. So it's you're funding a $10,000 tuition, and it'll tell you $10,000 is the tuition amount, and the cap, the total amount that the student would ever pay is, say, it's $22,000. And then underneath it has a chart that says minimum income threshold, and all the ones that I've seen were 40 or 50. Because they were in California, so the minimum was higher than like in Indiana. And then for each of the bands of income, it told you what the monthly payment would be for that band of income. So if you were making $50,000, your payment is going to be whatever, $450 a month. And so the student who is considering this option can see, okay, well, I'm going to have to make, I won't have to pay if I only make 40 grand because the minimum's 50. So as long as I'm making 50, my monthly payment for the term, 3 years, whatever in the ones I've seen, it's been 3 years because they're shorter programs. It says, you'll have a $450 payment until you reach the cap. Unless you don't reach the cap by the third year, you're done. So the student never pays more than the cap. They could conceivably pay less than the cap. And the term is as long as the term is, unless there's sort of extenuating circumstances. But the student is going into it seeing very clearly the maximum amount they're going to pay, how much they're going to pay depending on how much they make. So there's no, and so from the student's perspective, Margaret, going to your question about what if they have lots of other debt, the student is still seeing, okay, well, if I have, these other loans and I know the payment on those loans is this much, then the payment on this loan is going to be, I know exactly how much it's going to be. It's going to be $500 a month. Is this feasible for me or not? And if it's not, then you don't have to do it. And I think that's the other thing that's worth mentioning is this is just another option. It's another tool. So it's not like every student is going to be forced to do this. We're not mandating it. This is just sort of another tool in a school's kind of quiver, right, to help fund whatever gap the student might have.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
That raises another question, which is, do you give truth in lending disclosures?
We give disclosures that are equal in, so the answer is no, because this doesn't fit well within the definition of an extension of credit under the Truth in Lending Act. But the Truth in Lending Act tells private student lenders how to give disclosures, and there's a timing, frequency, and content for those disclosures, which we match. So the difference is that Truth in Lending Act would require, Regulation Z would say, must disclose the APR. And we don't have one. We don't have an interest rate. There's a percent of income, though, that's very important, and it's not in Reg Z, so we would give that. So there are things, the total payment cap versus the total cost of financing. There are things that are really important about our income share agreements that we highlight in place of the things that would be important about a loan.
Right, because on a TILA disclosure, you have the amount financed, the cost of financing it, and then the total. And so on the income share agreements, it's the sort of the same idea of here's how much it's here's what you're financing, here's your tuition, here's the term, how long you're going to pay, here's the percentage of your tuition, and here's the cap, right?
Reg C
Or
also
tuition of
includes-
income, I'm sorry.
So-
Yeah.
And you'd have specific monthly payment amounts, number of monthly payments, and we don't know those exact amounts, so we have to give a matrix that would show what your payment is under different incomes. So there are reasons why we cannot match that exactly. That would be confusing if we try to match it exactly to people. And the goal of disclosures is to unconfuse them. We have things that are equal in, again, frequency, timing, and quality to loan disclosures.
The one disclosure that comes to mind that you probably could give would actually be the APR, if you based it on your cap. So that, if you're saying 2.5 times the amount borrowed in essence, or the amount charged, that should give you over your cap, assuming it plays out, what the maximum interest rate would be. I mean, it may vary, I understand, because of reaching the time period or less income or whatever, but that's one that you could give them some idea. So in other words, the point of truth in lending is so people can compare alternative offers.
Right.
And it's very different in some ways, but in some ways there are things that you might be able to compare. That's why I wondered.
You'll see when we supply some examples, Madam Vice Chair, we'll show you how we do show comparable terms for a loan of similar duration and similar target. Because what people really want to know, we think as to financing a lot of the time, consumers in our experience are worried about affordability, and they're worried about the monthly payment and how many payments it will be. As to choosing a school, they're worried very much about value. We think that communicating back what happens outcome-wise will add to people being satisfied that they got what they paid for. And those two things come together, I think, on a good income share agreement disclosure. But we are still, we've done our best on this. We're still open to input, and that goes also for financial literacy. The financial literacy module we're building. I think people grow up, whether they actually understand loans or not, with an ambient understanding of loans, or they think they have an ambient understanding of loans, which is why they're comfortable doing something like a mortgage without reading it, because everybody does it, and their parents did it, or a student loan. We've been really fortunate. The schools who worked with us and their students and given us lots of feedback, but we know that we have more to teach people about this. This isn't something everybody's seen or done before when they enter.
Can you tell us about how many approximately for-profit, nonprofit, and public institutions you're working with?
No, I should totally know that too. I think that we are probably half and half for-profit and non-for-profit, with our for-profits in the non-accredited space. Think of like code academies, where this is wildly popular. Because it's so hard for people coming in as career switchers, they're really looking for a job, and it's really hard for them to assess which code school is better. So they think about who's going to get them the job they're looking for. And on the college side, we've been kind of selective about our clients. So almost entirely, I think, private, nonprofit, and public. We may launch with a for-profit college or two in the next year or two. But we're looking for schools that other schools want to be like, and schools that do the right thing by their students, especially when we're in a bigger market or a bigger segment of post-secondary ed, like four-year colleges.
Are you aware of any competitors to your business that are jumping into this market?
We are starting to see some competitors. I think there's two ways to think of competition here. One is people are good at income share agreements, and I suppose that's a thing that we're good at, and so those are competitors. But the thing that we do is we don't print income share agreements. We help schools succeed. Schools want to enroll more diverse people. They want to graduate them. They want to get granular outcomes data back. Today they rely on surveys. They lose lots of diverse applicants. The ones who invest in outcomes aren't rewarded for it, versus the ones who invest in great TV ads get rewarded for that. We're trying to change that for our school clients, and I think applying income share agreements to do that is something that nobody else has undertaken to be great at yet. And so I think these other businesses will maybe converge on helping schools, but so I guess we've seen them, but I haven't seen any significant traction, and I haven't seen schools making big changes or going in on this with other companies.
Thanks again, appreciate it all.
All right. Any other questions? I think it's going to be important for us to get some of the information that was requested, and potentially we may have some follow-up questions for you.
Can we, do we have the authority to grant continuing education units and finance accounting to everybody who is here today?
I feel smarter already.
You know, one thing at the last meeting is, I think you raised, Kate, that you understood that the Bureau might have some issues with these. And I wondered, Mike, is there something that the Bureau would like to present at a future meeting about the concerns the Bureau has, if it does?
So I would be open to have more discussions with VMO. Obviously, we are aware of some ISA stuff going on across the country, so it's definitely something that we have begin to have some conversations about internally. And so at the time that we feel ready to have that conversation, we'll definitely bring it forward.
That was sort of part of my thinking behind this presentation, was that, just in feedback that we had gotten from the Bureau with clients that were looking at ISAs, the very specific questions about how are you going to handle refunds, how are you going to handle closures, so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to really focus on those questions, because those are the things that ultimately are going to be, from a consumer standpoint, the most important things from the Bureau side, and making sure that, because, for me, as somebody who was in-house for 100 years, I saw the struggle of students trying to figure out how to pay, and students who had bad credit, or students who weren't eligible for, different ways of paying for things, and they were ultimately left to either figure out how to pay in cash, or use their credit cards, or, whatever the case may be. And in those situations, if the student is not successful, they still have to pay. And to me, this sort of risk share is a really interesting way of approaching, going into a program, knowing that if you're not successful, the school's not going to be getting paid. And that, gives the school a lot of incentive to do the best they can to educate you and get you into a job. So I wanted to thank you for being here. Does anyone else have questions before I? This was great. Thank you very much, and thank you for entertaining all of our questions.
I loved coming here. Thank you.
Sacramento's going to be your new favorite place. So with that, I'll open the floor if anyone has, thanks, Tonio, if anyone has any public comment or questions of anything else.
Hello again, Angela Perry. Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment on this discussion. We really appreciate Mr. DiSorrento's time and the information that he provided for the Bureau and for the Advisory Committee. TICAS agrees that it is always important to focus on the costs of pursuing education as well as the sources of funding available to cover those costs. However, ISAs may be intuitively appealing, but they are very complex and as yet untested as a way to finance higher education. It is imperative that we carefully consider who ISAs are being marketed to and be very clear about what problem they are purported to solve for students and how they will solve that problem, because ISAs do come with a host of concerns. Those concerns include the lack of predictability of monthly, annual, and total costs of the ISA, which will be based on future unknown earnings. They also come with the risk of reinforcing social and financial inequities, because pricing by risk and projected future earnings may serve to further disadvantage students based on their selected career field, their race, or their gender. Additionally, ISAs have the potential to burden students, as we've discussed, with additional debt on top of federal loan eligibility, undermining the ability of income-based repayment to protect those students from unmanageable payments. The risk is especially high for low-income students who are already starting out with fewer assets and face a steep uphill socioeconomic climb towards changing that. For these students, ISAs can represent a risky and unpredictable investment, which takes another bite out of their income on top of federal student loans, and which could have significant consequences for their ability to invest in their futures. We've heard very rosy claims about ISAs today, and we hope that all of that information proves to be correct. But the information makes them sound as though ISAs are almost virtual giveaways to students. But we've heard too little about the facts that these are financing products designed to generate a return on investment for the investor and from that student's future income. To ensure that the overall investment is recouped and that it generates revenue, these products are differentially priced for students depending on their circumstances and choices. And we hope that the Bureau and Advisory Committee will provide more information about those aspects, including data on, lost my train of thought, on how future earnings are projected, what the target revenue and profit generated are, and other details about how that financing works on the other side of this equation. There may be some kinds of students who could benefit from well-structured and regulated ISA programs, especially students who don't currently have access to financial aid through the federal government. But we believe that the majority of students remain better served by the widely understood and available existing public financial aid system, which offers the same terms and conditions to all students, regardless of their background or their future path. We urge the Bureau to proceed with extreme caution and the highest level of scrutiny when considering the appropriateness of allowing ISAs for California students, and we are available for any questions or further information we can provide.
I have a question for you. Can you tell me why you think that a program where a student's ultimate, and assuming all of this is disclosed, so students know up front what the minimum they have to earn, depending on what they earn, what the payment is, they know they're going to pay for 3 years, they know exactly how much the cap is. How are students who are sort of the underserved population, why do you think that with that kind of a setup that they would be somehow underserved, lesser served, that they would be the ones taken advantage of when, if your goal is to make sure that those students have access to education and at the back end can choose whatever career path makes sense for them, and if it means that they don't pay because they don't make enough, they don't pay. How, like, can you just give me some more input on why you think that's a problem?
I'm happy to provide more information and comments. I know that this technically isn't I'm not supposed to do question and answer because it's not on the agenda, but I'm happy to provide some more information about that. I can also say that students that enter at a disadvantage and or have underserved characteristics or belong to a demographic that is typically underpaid or paid less than other demographics, they're going to pay the same percentage of their income, but they may be making significantly less. So there are reasons and that ISAs can reinforce those unfortunate discriminations and the inability to sort of overcome those could potentially be addressed, but as of now, we don't have that information.
All right, thank you. Any other public comment relating to the income share agreements? Okay, I will say that as a no. Future agenda items.
I have one slight change, and hopefully the committee will be able to work with me. Our next meeting is August 15th. I will actually be flying back into town that morning, and I wanted to know if there's a possibility we could switch it to August 5th or August 16th, so just the next day.
Huge inconvenience for everybody, Michael, and you're just going to have to change your trip.
Not a problem.
So,
Whatever you need, Madam Chair.
Me. Everything is on my schedule. Anybody on the committee have conflict on the 16th?
Thank you very much.
All right. So noted. Yes, now is the time for the committee to suggest any future agenda items.
One of the things that was mentioned earlier was the surveys used in the inspections. And we had talked about those a little bit before, and I don't know whether it might be appropriate to revisit that as to what's involved in those. As I recall, I thought some of the questions were a little too general or vague and weren't going to really get to the heart of what problems there might be. And so if at some point you're starting to look at revising those, I think it'd be good back to us to look at before they're finalized. So
Can I ask something on that too?
Next meeting
Yeah,
or later.
on the survey issue, I think it was Beth that was talking about switching to Scantron. And I always found that one of the more valuable things on the surveys was the option for students to provide a narrative about things that they're unhappy about. And they can still do that. Okay, I just wanted to check on that. Thank you. Go ahead, Margaret.
And then I think we'd asked for the report on the information about the unsubstantiated complaints. So I don't know if that's really an agenda item or just a change in reporting. We had talked, I think, also last time about one of the things that, although enforcement is doing much better now and has most of the positions filled, that still there were a couple of issues. One is, and I think the issue about whether there's a way to make sure they're paid at the higher level of the AGPA and rather than the lower level, and another possibility being whether there's any possibility to set up an office in LA so that people are not having to spend so much time traveling and you might have more applicants. Since you have most of those positions filled, maybe that doesn't seem, but maybe that's something that could be discussed next time as something to look at. And this is just a question. I think you've set up to have your, I think it was your inspectors or maybe your approval folks deal with the same schools regularly. And I think that has some real advantages, but it also has potential disadvantage. One thing that is a common criticism of state agencies, not this agency in particular, is that as people deal with the same entities over and over again, they sort of get captured almost by the entities that they're supervising. So it would be just a question about, looking at that and what
Captured like Stockholm Syndrome?
My only piece to that is my understanding with being at the Bureau for only 6 months now is that we changed it to this new model here recently. So
Margaret, are you suggesting that that's a future agenda item for discussion? I don't want to get into discussion
Yeah, just
on
a
this
future agenda item. And I realize it's a recent
update.
change and, but something to maybe discuss. And again, you may decide not next meeting, but that's something I'd just like to keep an eye on as to how you have set up to deal with that potential. And, obviously it makes sense, but maybe at a certain time you figure, well, we need to change people to a different. And I've been in that situation. It is helpful if you're dealing with the same company again and again, and I can understand it, but it has its downside to be looked at also. Thank you very much.
Other suggestions from the committee? Do we need to do a public comment on future agenda items? Does anybody have noted all the ones that have already been represented? Any new, previously mentioned agenda items that we can consider for next time? All right. With that, I will, do we need to move to adjourn? Or can I just adjourn? As your chairperson, I adjourn this meeting. See you all in August. Thank you, everyone.